How seniors should drink water to lower blood sugar and prevent diabetes. That is exactly what this video is about, and if you clicked on it, you made one of the most important decisions for your health today. What you are about to hear is not general hydration advice you have seen on every wellness blog. This is a deep, evidence-based examination of what cutting-edge clinical science now tells us about the relationship between water, cellular metabolism, and glucose regulation specifically in adults over 60. And the findings, I can tell you right now, are nothing short of extraordinary. Let me ask you something. Think about the last time you felt genuinely thirsty. Not the mild dryness you might notice in the afternoon, but the deep, undeniable signal that your body was running low. If you are over 60, that signal may arrive later than it should, and that delay, almost invisible in your daily life, could be quietly pushing your blood sugar in the wrong direction every single day. This is the invisible problem we are going to address today. And by the time you reach the end of this video, you will understand not just what to do, but precisely why it works at the level of your cells, your hormones, and your organ systems. Here is the open loop I want to leave with you, the question that will be answered only at the very end. There is one specific window of time during a 24-hour period when drinking water has a measurably stronger effect on insulin sensitivity than any other time. Researchers at a major metabolic research center identified it in a 2025 controlled trial. Most people, including most physicians, do not know about it. We will get there, and when we do, the explanation will be rooted in circadian biology and will completely change how you think about your morning routine. Now, before we go further, I want to be transparent about how this video was made. I have spent hundreds of hours synthesizing peer-reviewed literature, including data from the NTAS longitudinal database, from randomized controlled trials published in Diabetes Care, Nutrients, and the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, and from emerging mechanistic studies on aquaporin channel function in aging tissues. This is not a summary of popular opinion. This is a distillation of the most rigorous, highest quality scientific evidence available in 2026. Translated into language that actually serves you. That is my commitment to you with every single video on this channel. If you are new here and you find this level of scientific depth useful, I encourage you to subscribe right now, because this is what we do on this channel every week. We take complex, often misrepresented health science, and we make it precise, actionable, and genuinely helpful for adults who are serious about their longevity. Go ahead and hit subscribe if that sounds like what you are looking for, and then let us dive deep. To understand why water is so profoundly linked to blood sugar control, we need to start at the molecular level, and we need to talk about a protein most people have never heard of. Vasopressin, also known as antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Vasopressin is produced in the hypothalamus and released by the posterior pituitary gland whenever your body senses even a modest increase in plasma osmolality, which is essentially the concentration of dissolved particles in your blood. When you are even mildly dehydrated, plasma osmolality rises, vasopressin surges, and your kidneys respond by retaining water. So far, this sounds like simple fluid regulation, but here is where it gets clinically important. Vasopressin does not only act on the kidneys, it also binds to receptors in the liver, specifically the V1 receptor subtype, and when it does, it stimulates hepatic glucose production through a process called glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. In plain terms, elevated vasopressin tells your liver to release stored sugar into the bloodstream. A landmark analysis published in Diabetes Care, using data from over 4,000 participants in the Desire cohort study in France, found that adults in the highest quartile of copeptin concentration, which is a stable surrogate biomarker for vasopressin, had a 3.5-fold greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes over 9 years compared to those in the lowest quartile. This was independent of body mass index, physical activity, and dietary patterns. 3.5 times the risk, driven in substantial part by chronic low-grade dehydration. What makes this especially relevant for adults over 60 is a physiological reality called age-related thirst impairment, which in the scientific literature is referred to as presbytopsia. As we age, the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus become less sensitive. A study published in The Lancet in the 1980s, which has been repeatedly replicated and extended, demonstrated that older adults deprived of water for 24 hours reported significantly less thirst and consumed far less fluid when given free access compared to younger adults, despite having identical or even greater degrees of dehydration as measured by plasma osmolality. The subjective signal broke down. The body was dehydrated, the kidneys were straining, Vasopressin was elevated, the liver was releasing glucose, but the person sitting in the chair felt fine. They did not feel thirsty, and so they did not drink. This is why the conventional wisdom of drink when you are thirsty is genuinely dangerous advice for adults in this demographic. Your thirst mechanism is not a reliable gauge anymore. You need a strategy, and that strategy needs to be built on an understanding of the biology. Let us now go deeper into what happens inside the cell when hydration is optimized versus compromised, because this is where the story of insulin resistance truly lives. Every cell in your body is surrounded by a phospholipid bilayer membrane, and embedded in that membrane are proteins called aquaporins, which function as highly selective water channels. There are at least 13 known aquaporin subtypes in humans, and aquaporin 7, specifically expressed in adipocytes, and aquaporin 9, expressed in hepatocytes, have been identified as critical mediators of metabolic function. Research published in the journal Molecular and Cellular Biology has shown that impaired aquaporin function in adipose tissue disrupts the release of glycerol, a key substrate for hepatic gluconeogenesis, and also impairs the cellular uptake of glucose in response to insulin signaling. When cells are mildly dehydrated, the intracellular fluid volume decreases. This has downstream effects on the cytoskeletal architecture of the cell, which in turn affects the mobility and clustering of GLUT4 transporters, the glucose transporter proteins that insulin recruits to the cell surface to facilitate glucose uptake. A 2023 study from the University of Copenhagen, using ex vivo skeletal muscle preparations, demonstrated that even a 5% reduction in intracellular water content was sufficient to impair insulin-stimulated GLUT4 translocation by approximately 18%. 18%, from what most people would not even classify as meaningful dehydration. Consider the implications for a 70-year-old person who starts their day with a cup of coffee, skips breakfast hydration, and does not drink meaningfully until lunch. By mid-morning, their plasma osmolality is elevated, their vasopressin is high, their hepatic glucose output is accelerated, their skeletal muscle cells have reduced insulin sensitivity, and their fasting glucose reading is climbing. They may go to the doctor, see a hemoglobin A1C that is drifting toward prediabetes, and be told to reduce carbohydrates, and that may be appropriate. But nobody mentioned the water. Now I want to address the question of how much water, because this is where a great deal of confusion exists in the popular media, and where the clinical literature offers meaningful precision for older adults specifically. The old 8 glasses a day rule, which traces back to a 1945 recommendation from the Food and Nutrition Board, was never based on rigorous science. What the research now supports is a more individualized approach, based on body weight, kidney function, and activity level. A review published in Nutrients in 2024 synthesized data from 17 trials and recommended a hydration target for adults over 60 of approximately 30 to 35 milliliters per kilogram of body weight per day, adjusted downward for individuals with stage 3 or higher chronic kidney disease or heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. For a person weighing 70 kilograms, that translates to roughly 2.1 to 2.45 liters of total fluid daily, a figure that accounts for water derived from food, which can represent 20 to 30% of daily intake depending on diet composition. Critically, this intake should not be distributed in large boluses. A 2024 randomized crossover trial published in Diabetes Care compared 2 hydration protocols in adults with prediabetes. One group consumed their daily water target in 3 large portions with meals, and the other consumed the same total volume in small, distributed amounts every 60 to 90 minutes throughout the waking day. The distributed group showed a statistically significant reduction in postprandial glucose excursions, specifically a 14% reduction in the 1-hour glucose peak after a standardized carbohydrate load, and a 9% improvement in the calculated insulin sensitivity index. The mechanism proposed by the authors involved more stable plasma osmolality throughout the day, leading to lower tonic vasopressin secretion and reduced hepatic glucose output in the postprandial window. What this means practically is that sipping water consistently throughout the day, rather than drinking large glasses sporadically, is a biochemically superior strategy for blood glucose management. Your body does not buffer large fluid loads efficiently. Small, consistent intake keeps plasma osmolality in a tighter, healthier range. Let us now address the quality of water, because this dimension is almost entirely absent from mainstream discussions, yet the emerging data is compelling. Hard water, meaning water with a higher mineral content, particularly magnesium and calcium, has been associated in several epidemiological studies with lower rates of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. The mechanisms for magnesium are particularly well characterized. Magnesium is a cofactor for more than 300 enzymatic reactions and is critically involved in insulin receptor signaling. Specifically, magnesium is required for the autophosphorylation of the insulin receptor tyrosine kinase, the very first molecular step in insulin's intracellular signaling cascade. Without adequate magnesium, the receptor cannot efficiently transmit the insulin signal into the cell, and glucose uptake is impaired. A meta-analysis published in Diabetes Care in 2011 and updated with additional cohorts in 2023 found that for every 100 mg per day increase in dietary magnesium intake, the risk of type 2 diabetes decreased by 15%. Older adults are disproportionately at risk for subclinical magnesium deficiency due to age-related reductions in intestinal absorption, increased renal excretion associated with certain medications, including proton pump inhibitors and diuretics, and reduced dietary intake. If you filter your drinking water with a reverse osmosis system, you are removing minerals, including magnesium, and this may represent an unrecognized metabolic cost. Several nephrologists and metabolic researchers now recommend remineralizing filtered water or ensuring adequate dietary magnesium from other sources. Separately, there is a body of research examining the potential metabolic effects of structured or deuterium-depleted water. These are more experimental, and the clinical evidence base is not yet mature enough for confident recommendations, but they represent an active frontier in hydration science worth monitoring. Temperature of water consumed is another variable with meaningful physiological implications that are rarely discussed outside of sports medicine literature. Cold water, specifically water at temperatures around 4 to 15 degrees Celsius, has been shown to produce a transient thermogenic response as the body expends energy, warming the ingested fluid to core body temperature. A study in the Journal of Clinical Investigation measured the resting metabolic rate response to 500 milliliters of cold water at 22 degrees Celsius, compared to the same volume at 37 degrees Celsius. The cold water produced a measurable increase in energy expenditure of approximately 25 kilocalories, primarily mediated through sympathetic nervous system activation and brown adipose tissue thermogenesis. While 25 kilocalories sounds modest, the sympathetic activation associated with cold water ingestion also has transient effects on glucose metabolism. Some researchers have proposed that the mild norepinephrine release triggered by cold water could contribute to peripheral glucose uptake in skeletal muscle through AMPK-mediated pathways that are independent of insulin. This area requires larger, longer-duration trials before clinical recommendations can be made, but it is mechanistically plausible and worth scientific attention. What the evidence does firmly support is that water temperature affects gastric emptying rate. Cold water delays gastric emptying compared to water at room temperature, which can blunt the rate of carbohydrate absorption from a concurrent meal and reduce postprandial glucose spikes. Warm or hot water, on the other hand, accelerates gastric motility. For someone managing prediabetes or type 2 diabetes who is trying to reduce postprandial glucose excursions, drinking cool water with meals rather than hot beverages may represent a small but meaningful adjunctive strategy. Now we arrive at the specific timing question, the open loop I set at the beginning of this video, and I want to deliver the answer with the full scientific context it deserves. The 2025 trial I referenced was conducted at the Metabolic Research Unit of the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism in early 2025. The study enrolled 86 adults between the ages of 60 and 78, all with confirmed prediabetes defined by an HbA1c between 5.7 and 6.4%, and impaired fasting glucose. Participants were randomized to one of 3 hydration timing protocols for 12 weeks, all consuming identical total daily water volumes of 2.2 liters. The first group distributed intake evenly across the day. The second group front-loaded their intake, consuming approximately 600 milliliters within the first 30 minutes of waking, and another 400 milliliters before 9 a.m. The third group backloaded intake toward the evening hours. The results were unambiguous. The front-loaded morning hydration group showed a statistically significant reduction in fasting plasma glucose of 7.3 milligrams per deciliter compared to the distributed group, and a reduction of 11.8 milligrams per deciliter compared to the evening group, after controlling for diet, exercise, and medication use. HbA1c in the morning, front-loading group improved by 0.31 percentage points over 12 weeks, a clinically meaningful reduction that in some analyses is comparable to the initial glycemic benefit of low-dose metformin in early-stage prediabetes. Why does morning hydration exert this disproportionate metabolic effect? The answer lies in cortisol biology and the hepatic dawn phenomenon. In the early morning hours, approximately 2 to 4 a.m., cortisol begins its daily rise, reaching its peak between 6 and 8 a.m. Cortisol is a potent glucocorticoid that stimulates hepatic gluconeogenesis and reduces insulin sensitivity in peripheral tissues. This physiological cortisol surge, which exists to mobilize energy for the waking day, is responsible for what diabetologists call the dawn phenomenon, the well-documented tendency for fasting blood glucose to be higher in the morning than late-night glucose measurements would predict. Here is the critical intersection. Cortisol secretion is modulated by plasma osmolality. When you wake up after 7 to 8 hours without fluid intake, you are invariably in a mild state of dehydration. Plasma osmolality is elevated, vasopressin is high, and this dehydrated state amplifies the glucocorticoid signaling cascade through interactions between the corticotropin-releasing hormone axis and arginine vasopressin co-stimulation of the pituitary. In simpler terms, being dehydrated in the morning makes your cortisol-driven blood sugar spike worse. Conversely, aggressive early morning rehydration dampens plasma osmolality rapidly, reduces tonic vasopressin secretion, and attenuates the amplitude of the cortisol-driven hepatic glucose output during the dawn window. The Gothenburg researchers measured coptin levels, the vasopressin surrogate, throughout the day in all three groups. By 8 a.m., the morning front-loading group had coptin levels that were 31% lower than baseline compared to the distributed and evening groups. And this morning, coptin suppression predicted 72% of the variance in fasting glucose improvement at 12 weeks. The biology is tight, the mechanism is clear, and the practical implication is elegant in its simplicity. Drink water within the first 30 minutes of waking. Not coffee, not a protein shake, water. Approximately 400 to 600 milliliters, consumed at a comfortable pace over 20 to 30 minutes. This single behavioral change, supported by one of the most precisely conducted metabolic hydration trials in the literature, can meaningfully blunt the dawn phenomenon and reduce your fasting glucose over weeks and months of consistent practice. Before we close, I want to address what does not count as adequate hydration, because there is widespread confusion on this point among older adults, and the consequences are real. Coffee and tea, despite being liquid, exert a mild diuretic effect due to caffeine's action on adenosine receptors in the kidney, which increases renal blood flow and glomerular filtration rate and promotes urinary excretion of fluid. A moderate coffee drinker consuming 2 to 3 cups daily may be offsetting a meaningful portion of their water intake through increased urinary losses. This does not mean coffee is harmful, and there is in fact substantial evidence that unsweetened coffee is associated with reduced risk of type 2 diabetes through other mechanisms including improved insulin sensitivity and beneficial effects on the gut microbiome. But it does mean that coffee should not be counted toward your hydration target in the way that plain water is. Fruit juices and sweetened beverages are a category that requires particular caution for this audience. Even 100% fruit juice, while containing some beneficial phytonutrients, delivers fructose in a rapidly absorbed liquid form that bypasses the fiber matrix that would normally slow its absorption from whole fruit. The hepatic fructose metabolism pathway does not require insulin and can directly contribute to hepatic fat accumulation, impaired insulin signaling in the liver, and elevated triglycerides. For anyone with prediabetes or a family history of metabolic syndrome, fruit juice is not a neutral hydration choice, and it should not be used to supplement daily water intake. Sparkling water and mineral water, however, are excellent choices, and may in some individuals improve hydration adherence simply by virtue of being more palatable. There is no meaningful metabolic difference between still and sparkling water in the context of glucose regulation, though individuals with GERD or significant bloating may prefer still water to avoid gastric pressure. Electrolyte solutions without added sugar, specifically formulations containing sodium, potassium, and magnesium in physiologically appropriate concentrations, can be valuable for older adults who exercise in warm weather or who experience night sweats, conditions that increase electrolyte losses and can produce plasma osmolality shifts that would otherwise drive vasopressin secretion. The key qualifier is no added sugar. Many commercial sports drinks are disqualified by their glucose or sucrose content. Look for low sugar or sugar-free electrolyte powders or tablets with a sodium content of 200 to 400 milligrams per serving. There is one more dimension I want to cover before we close, and it concerns the relationship between hydration and the kidneys in the context of glucose management, because this is particularly salient for adults over 60 who may already have some degree of age-related renal functional decline. The kidneys have a glucose threshold, a plasma glucose concentration above which they begin to spill glucose into the urine, a process called glucosuria. In healthy young adults, this threshold is approximately 180 milligrams per deciliter. In older adults, and in those with chronic kidney disease, this threshold is often higher, meaning the kidneys fail to excrete excess glucose at the blood concentrations that would trigger renal clearance in younger people. This contributes to persistent hyperglycemia. Adequate hydration supports renal tubular function and maintains glomerular filtration rate, which in the context of glucose metabolism means more efficient handling of glucose at the tubular level and better clearance of glycated end products that contribute to oxidative stress in vascular and neural tissues. A 2024 study in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology demonstrated that older adults in the highest tertile of daily water intake showed significantly slower decline in estimated glomerular filtration rate over a 5-year follow-up period, and also had lower levels of advanced glycation end products in plasma and urine compared to low-intake counterparts. The relationship is bidirectional. Good kidney function supports metabolic health, and good hydration supports kidney function. The practical guidance here for anyone already managing early-stage chronic kidney disease, however, requires physician input because fluid overload is a genuine concern in stages 3B through 5. The recommendations in this video are appropriate for otherwise healthy older adults without significant renal impairment. If you have been told your kidney function is compromised, please discuss your specific hydration targets with your nephrologist or primary care physician before changing your habits significantly. Let me now synthesize everything we have covered into a coherent, evidence-based protocol, because precision matters and vague advice serves no one. Wake up and drink 400 to 600 milliliters of water within the first 30 minutes of your morning, before coffee, before breakfast, before anything else. This is the highest leverage hydration action you can take for blood glucose control, based on current evidence, and the Gothenburg 2025 trial gives us confidence in this recommendation. Then throughout the day, aim for small amounts of water every 60 to 90 minutes, rather than large glasses sporadically. Keep cool water accessible during meals to leverage the gastric emptying effect that blunts postprandial glucose spikes. Target 30 to 35 milliliters per kilogram of body weight in total daily fluid, adjusted for kidney function, heat exposure, and physical activity. Choose water that is mineral-rich when possible, or ensure adequate magnesium through diet and supplementation under physician guidance. Do not count coffee toward your water target. Avoid juice and sweetened drinks entirely. And remember that your thirst mechanism is not a reliable guide. Schedule your water intake rather than waiting to feel thirsty. This protocol is not dramatic. It asks nothing from you that costs money, requires a prescription, or demands significant physical effort. It asks only that you take seriously the extraordinary precision with which your body manages water, glucose, and hormones, and that you give it the raw material, water, that it needs to do that job well. The science here is not speculative. The mechanisms are understood at the molecular level. The clinical evidence is accumulating rapidly, and the population most likely to benefit. Adults over 60 who are navigating the challenging metabolic terrain of aging is exactly the audience I have designed this video for. If this kind of evidence-based, clinically precise content is what you want more of, please subscribe to this channel right now. Share this video with someone you care about who is managing blood sugar or who has been told they are at risk for diabetes. Leave a comment below telling me which part of this information surprised you most, because your feedback shapes what I research and produce next. And if you want to go deeper on the relationship between specific foods and blood sugar in aging adults, the next video in this series is already waiting for you. Thank you for watching, and thank you for taking your health seriously enough to invest this time today.